What's up? Welcome back. We're gonna do another musky fly sucker, and it's gonna be kind of a pale sucker. Lake St. Clair has bite-sized sucker that tend to be a little bit more pale than the average. So we're gonna do the majority of the body in this kind of cream-colored flash and fiber from Nightmare Musky Flies. It's a custom brush. I added a lot of their wavelength and shad belly to this, make it kind of shiny. I personally believe in a lot of flash for musky. Tend to like to almost overdo it, and that just comes from the whole bucktail theory. If just a ball of flash catches musky, you might as well. It's the most popular musky bait. It's just a ball of flash and some spoons. So I don't think they shy away from it. So all my brushes have a ton of wavelength, a ton of ripple ice, whatever it is. I just add a lot of flash to my brushes. And digging this. This is pretty cool. Pretty cool color. Got a bunch of matching dubbing on the table here. So at various stages we might veil it with some blends of Nightmare Musky Flies. Titan dubbing. And the first stage, we're going to use the tan magnum dubbing and the cream Titan for the flash. And I've blended the two of them. And the magnum has a little bit more of a mass to it, so we want to get a little bit of a bump on this shank here for our Pachirini saddle tails. These are the XXL, and it's kind of a matte gold finish. And then we're going to do a lateral line up towards the head in a darker, more flashy copper. Got these Misfit voodoo eyes picked out. Pretty cool. A little bit of a shine to them. Kind of they're like, what do they call them? Bronze back red, which is kind of cool. But I feel like, yeah, that's the right vibe. So a darker head, copper head, lighter body, sucker. Let's get into it. So it's about 2.5 inches, 3 inches. And the purpose of this is solely just to get a bump for the tails to be secured on there. And I've been doing it different ways. I'm gonna do a top and bottom. So we're gonna put kind of a significant amount. The way I've been liking is to tie them in at the halfway point of the shank. So, and then just do a 50-50 back or something slightly less than that. 60-40. And the dubbings has that quality that when you fold it over, it creates a really nice bump there. And that is a nice contact point for those tails and helps them from sort of collapsing in on themselves. And then tying it in the middle leaves a nice little area of shank for the brush. So when you're getting close to the eye with the brush, if you were to tie these in right behind the eye, it'd be harder to wrap that brush all the way to the end and secure it. I've been running into a little bit of a problem when I put this dubbing all the way back. So this is kind of where I found the sweet spot for this first step. So there we got a little mass on the shank. a little bit of a gap between the eye, and we can glue our tails on. I really dig this matte finish here. It's kind of cool. It's the first time I've used this. So the first way we're going to tie it in is just side by side. Start with some Zappa Gap on the bump we created and the shank. And these are the full length XXLs. And so I just put the tip of the XXL saddle tail right behind the eye and then strap it down. And that's good. These things don't break. They're extremely durable. Just like you would a feather. It's just side by side tie there. And then I like to do a third one on top. Just a little bit more mass, a little bit more vibration, a little bit more positive reinforcement. Allows you to, if you wanted to, you could add a different color or a more flashy tail on the top that catches the sun a little bit better. But for this one, we're just going to do 3 of the same. There we go. And then we're going to start with our brush. So these are a recent brush I made with the 0.009 wire, which is significantly thicker. Startling how different it is from the 0.006 wire. And I'm fairly new to brush making, so I've done most of my brushes in 0.006, and you know, not all the time, but sometimes the 0.006, when you're spinning the brushes and you're not careful about it, it just snaps on you, and it's pretty frustrating because it's a lot of work to try to salvage a broken brush, and you end up with a brush that's not that the fibers aren't that locked in, and it's just a pain in the butt. This 0.009 is much more stable to work with, but the end result's just a way thicker brush, which for me, with these small shanks, is what I like to use. Poses a little bit of problem once you get close to that eye. These are my dogs. WrestleMania. So, anyways, compromise. We'll see what we can do here. So far, so good with it. I've just been figuring it out, and it's working. So we're gonna wrap back over the brush a good amount. So we want that to lie down. Brush it out. And that's one of 2 shanks for the tail section. The goal for this fly is to have the majority of the body be a pale body, and then when we get to the head, we're gonna do an almost impossible transition, because this fly, it's this particular build format. There's not a lot of shanks. There's not a lot of length to it. The length we get out of the tails, we're kind of using that to our advantage. And so it's hard to get a lot of colors. These dogs. They're so feisty in the morning. They are not puppies, but they act like it. As I was saying, all right. Yeah, so there's not a lot of length to the actual body of this fly. So in order to get a lot of colors in, it's gonna pose a little bit of a challenge, but what I want is a nice transition. So we'll see how that'll work. This is kind of a little bit of an experiment. I'm missing my bodkin. Where you at? Let's see, yeah. I got this one for now. Just gonna get that glue out of the eye of that shank. And that's a 25 millimeter spawn shank. Super quality. They make great shanks. I put a lot of glue in there. All right. It's annoying me that I lost my bodkin, my go-to loon bodkin. It's probably hidden in plain sight right in front of me. But oh well. What can you do? So we're just gonna do a little trimming, and we're gonna leave a lot of this fly untrimmed until the end. But for the tail section, I know that's going to be the shortest section, so I have no problem trimming it a little bit. And when I say a little bit, it's just, I'm not trimming it down to where I think it's going to stay. I'm just giving it a little bit of a haircut. It's the first stages. All right, section 1. So 25 millimeter. You got your side by side and then a flat one on top, which helps you find the orientation if you were to lose it. I'm gonna move on to a 35, and this is the fish skull, first generation. At the end of this guy, I might do a veil. We'll see. The veil is just basically where you take dubbing and you finish the end like a little dubbing head, almost like if you were just finishing the fly. Creates a little bit more density. This Nightmare Musky Flies material has a little bit of UV reflectivity, but so does this dubbing. So it's kind of nice to add a little bit more dubbing to create a little bit more of like a hot spot as far as UV reflectivity. And I'm always thinking about that. That's something that I care about with the flies. I want them to have a UV language. It isn't so obvious to the human eye. thread base, close the gap, some Zappa gap, aptly named. So I'm just putting the glue on the exposed shank so that that thread can kind of climb up. Otherwise it just slips right back down. Just like that. This is a little shorter brush. I've got this kind of thicker one ready to go. But we're still good to use the shorter one in the second part. That's something to think about too when you're brush making is what section of the fly will this color most be used. And that's something I think about. I tend to not finish my flies in a lighter color. I like to have darker heads of the flies, and then keep the tail section or the body section the lighter colors. Occasionally I'll flip that, but as a general rule, that's kind of how I like the majority of my flies, or where I feel most confident. And I'll say that 80–90% of fishing a fly is confidence. You just fish differently when you believe in it. And this is a fly I'm tying for a buddy. And this is a color he believes in. It's not my go-to color, but it's absolutely a realistic sucker fly, which I think is great. For some reason, for me, personally, I've always gravitated towards unnatural flies. Bright pinks, chartreuse, fluorescent yellow. That gets me excited. And I think a part of it is me being stubborn. Like, I'm gonna feed you this unnatural fly, and I'm gonna get off on the fact that you're gonna eat it because it's cool looking, and not necessarily because you think it's you're fooled that it's a match the hatch situation, or an actual sucker. You're just gonna get angry at it, and you're gonna eat it, or you're gonna notice it, and your predator instincts are gonna override. And for some reason, that just makes me a little bit more excited. Causes me to believe a little bit more, which is, I think, strange. But to each their own. I have tied a few natural ones, and when I say natural, I say it pretty loosely, because the amount of flash that are in those flies is pretty unnatural. But if you've ever witnessed a sucker on the flats, especially one on Lake St. Clair, they have this ability to do this like belly roll. They'll kind of, it's a weird thing that they do. And the amount of flash is pretty startling that they have. They have a really flashy belly. And that's a thing that I've only seen in the suckers. And as they swim away, it's almost like they can kind of signal, or that, I don't know why they do that, but it's pretty interesting. But it's a pretty bright flash that you get from them. So that gives me encouragement that adding tons of flash to your sucker fly is not a bad thing. All right, so we got the 35mm, and we're gonna do a little bit of a veil, like just a head on it. So I'm gonna use the same mix This cream is lighter than the tan. The tan matches pretty well. So we're going to use more tan than the cream, but the cream has that amazing flash from Nightmare Musky Flies, and I need that flash in my dubbing. It's the best. Again, this stuff is not, I mean, it's not the brightest UV, but it definitely has a little bit more of a UV reflectivity to it. So something I care about. I'm going to shorten this. I'm going to have it. And we're going to do kind of a 50-50. So once we get to trimming, we're probably going to cut into this. So my goal for this stage is to do a loose wrap, then a little bit tighter wrap, mash it down, and then when I come around the front, I'm just going to tie or wrap right behind the eye. So I'm not going to wrap over the dubbing. Then we're going to flip it, and we're going to do the same thing. I like to make these videos early in the morning, and you probably can tell my voice is sounds pretty tired, but that's why. It's early. Most people are asleep right now, but I've had my coffee. I'm awake. It's just the voice hasn't woken up yet. All right, so same deal. I'm making a thread dam. This is pretty thin thread. It's an Orvis thread. I don't know what it is, but it's like a rounder thread. Pretty strong. It's just whatever thread they like to advertise as like a bass bug type of thread. Closest I could find to a kind of a neutral darker thread, but we might go over the end of the fly is going to end in this kind of rusty copper brown, and so I might take a marker to it. It's just a little added touch. So we kind of did a top and bottom, but I'm going to brush it to the side a little bit too. Doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be like a full coverage, but so you can see the quality of that that dubbing, how it changes the overall bulk of this section and adds a little bit more of a dense area, which again, these are just small touches, but something that I think makes a difference. And we are going to continue onto the hook shank with the same color. I want the majority of this fly to be a pale sucker color. And then when we get to the head, we're gonna do a pretty awesome transition. So we got the greatest hook ever made, Ahrex Universal Curved 4/0. And we're going to put a keel on it. These Game Changer flies are pretty dense. When you're wrapping brushes, you have a fly that wants to float, especially when you're using lighter bones. These shanks are all very light. And so it's important to add weight, and it's important to add weight in key areas that help with the swimming. So we're going to do about 7 inches. It's definitely longer than 6 inches. I don't have a ruler to measure this out, but basically I'm putting the tip of the wire at the eye of the hook, and then I'm kind of coming back to the end of the vise is where I've been liking the length. And this is 0.030 lead wire. As I've been tying these flies, I've been kind of counting the wraps. And so what we're going to do is at the bend of the hook, we're going to tie in the wire right about there. And I'm going to do 14 wraps down. And at our 14th wrap, we're going to start wrapping back up. So it's about 9 wraps back up, and that's what you're left with. So you got a little bit of a bump in the keel there, and it's a little higher. You got plenty of hook, and we're going to coat that in a cocoon of Solarez thin hard. It's so funny when I lose something on my table. It's like I know I'm going to find it, and it's going to be right in front of me, but so far no luck. Keep scanning. Yeah, I don't know where it is. This bodkin is perfectly fine. I just like that loon handle, those thick, big old quality handles that they have. Helps for when you're picking out your brush wraps. Oh, here we go. Paper towel. So, got that cocoon on there, and I'm just basically using the rotary part of the vise to make sure that it's even before I zap it with the light. Alright, so we got the tail section already. We're going to continue with the same color. And I have these pretty cool copper. These are very flashy, like a mirror copper. And those are going to be our lateral lines, and you're going to see that's going to match the hatch, or match the head pretty well. To secure this guy, we're going to use a 20 millimeter spawn shank. I recommend having needle nose pliers handy for these. So they're pretty thick. Go. So right about, I'd say halfway, a little bit less than halfway, a little further back of the Ahrex shank. Yeah, maybe actually halfway. And you want the back of that spawn shank to be just above the keel. Yeah. A little bit further down the bend, not equal with the shank. A little bit further down. You want to just have a good range of motion in the back there. Is all. So that looks about good to me. And same deal, once we do this, we're going to close that gap just a little bit with some glue. I might do another veil at the end of this guy. We'll see. I'm thinking, so we have this 55 millimeter shank, which is going to be our front end section. And that's not that much real estate for the amount of brushes I want to use to transition to that copper head. So I'm not sure if I want to start the transition towards the eye. And if I do, I think, well, I'm just looking at all these brushes. I'm thinking we'll start it the very end. So this is a slightly different color. It's you can see it's pretty obvious there. A little bit more of a pale yellow than a tan. I actually have another brush that's just a slightly bit more dark than this one. So I'm going to try to squeeze them all in. There's quite a few that I want to go through. And I don't think the end result's going to be that visible or that noticeable. But again, it's the small details that I get off on, and I kind of want to make it all work. So we'll see what happens. So at this point, I think this brush would work, but I'm actually going to switch to this guy just because it's a little thicker, and just in case maybe I want that extra length as I'm trimming. And these are the same. So this brush is the same as the last one. I love this tan color. This is a color that I've caught musky on Lake St. Clair. So any color you catch a fish on, that's part of your go-to. I mean, it's just one of those things with musky fishing. It's such a rare occurrence, and I certainly haven't been doing it that long. I am by no means an expert in musky, but there's basically 3 different flies I've caught musky on, and I've fished a lot of different colors, and I've been skunked more times than I've caught fish. So it's hard to have an expert point of view, but I do know what other people like to use, and so kind of take all that data and apply it to my color choices. But there was a really nice sunny day a few years back, and I caught a smaller muskie on a natural tan, and lots of flash, musky fly. And I know that fly didn't swim nearly as well as this fly is going to swim. So I'm excited for the possibilities once this guy is ready to go. All right, so we got the majority of the hook wrapped. I'm not doing too close wraps. I'm keeping it a little bit sparse. This is a thicker material, and the rest of the brushes, I think there's maybe one in there that there's one section that's the holographic flash and fiber, which is what this is. They have two. Well, they have a lot of material, Nightmare Musky Flies, but the holographic flash and fiber is a little more flashy. They use actual like strands of flash that's mixed in, and the actual fibers themselves are slightly thicker than their regular flash and fiber. So it builds more bulk, and that's okay for the tail section. I prefer the bulk to be up front, but we're gonna thin this down when we trim it. We're gonna trim it pretty thin, and I think it'll be just fine. And I like that we're mixing the two. I think that ultimately we'll end up creating a fly that's not as buoyant, that's easily castable. This particular fly is tied for somebody who fishes, I think, 450 grain line, which I recommend a 500 grain line for this particular build and fly. But it'll be castable with 450. So that's kind of the thought. So it is important to test your stuff and know what works well. And if you're gonna tie this fly, I recommend that if you're gonna cast it on anything less than 500, definitely trim it pretty skinny. It will make a difference. So that's 3 wraps. And that flash and fiber, it's funny because to me the flash and fiber, this is just all my own observation, but there's most of their Nightmare Musky Flies, their regular flash and fiber has a almost like a holographic quality to it. So to me, that's more holographic flash and fiber than their holographic flash and fiber, which has more substantial flash, but it's not as holographic. And what I mean by that is that the regular flash and fiber has this kind of oil slick flash in it that has that rainbow quality to it, which seems more holographic. Has like a distinct quality to it that I love. I love that stuff, that kind of rainbow. When you get those like rainbow beams off of the flash, it's super nice. All right, so we're at the end of the hook, and I do have this golden shiner Spartan dubbing, which is again, when you're using Nightmare Musky Flies, the beauty of it is that they have a dubbing that matches all their stuff. So it's really just nice to have that sort of fluency amongst all the products. So we're going to do a Spartan dubbing veil, a pretty thin one. We'll do a top and bottom. And the Spartan dubbing, the difference between that and the Titan, the Spartan has different flash. It's not as substantial as the Titan dubbing. And I'm not really too concerned at this stage with the veil with flash, because this particular brush and a lot of the brushes going forward are very, very flashy. And so it's actually nice to put a veil over that flash so that the flash kind of lights or illuminates the dubbing as it hits the light and works kind of like a lampshade. So 50-50, and then we're just going to create a little bit of a thread dam. And that's the beauty of having a nice eye to work with, is you can just wrap behind it and not worry about slippage. I've never taken the time to learn to whip finish with my fingers. Partly because I'm a drummer, hand drummer. I've got calluses, and so the line catches on my calluses. But it does look cool. The whip finish tool looks pretty dorky. So I am aware, but to each their own. So we're going to brush that out. That looks pretty great. Put eyes on that. You got yourself a streamer that would fish. Got yourself a pretty decent pike fly. Or small musky fly. It's a funny thing, eyes. They're definitely an added expense. And I get why a lot of fly tyers come to the conclusion that they're not really that necessary. But for this fly, I like to have a narrower head, and those eyes do help in the mechanics of it swimming. And when you put those eyes on, it just, for me, it's it's almost like this weird thing happens, and I believe in the fly a lot more. And that's, I don't know what that is. It's probably insecurity more than anything. But again, it matters. Believing in your fly matters. So the shank is upside down, and the purpose for that is solely for the rattle that we're going to put towards the back. And we want to create a little bit more real estate for that rattle to lay a little bit further back in order to get the maximum amount of brush wraps towards the eye. This is a 55 mil first generation shank, and it's pretty thin. So at this stage, it's definitely, you have to be kind of cautious of that. And when you're using a thinner thread, it's a lot more wraps to get your thread base. It's a lot more wraps for just about everything. So just be aware that it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. That's funny. Just looking at the body, I want this fly to have a lighter quality to it. So I don't want to make my extreme transition too early. I'm almost thinking like I should have kept this color towards the eye of the hook, or on the eye of the hook, and then started the transition up here. But again, this is just a first impression at this point, just being honest with you guys. That's what I'm thinking about, but I'm also confident that we'll make it look good. And when you start trimming, these darker fibers will sort of dissipate, and you'll see more of this tan body in this section. So I think we'll be just fine. So we'll continue with the same brush as right here. And before we do that, we'll put our rattle on. This is a medium Hareline plastic rattle. There's no substitute for this rattle. It is by far the best rattle. Incredible. And when we tie it in, we're going to tie it in at the bottom, and we're going to use that notch as kind of a way to position it. Hey, I'm back. For some reason, the camera just shut off. So going back, I think where we left off, I was using the notch to position the rattle, and there's where that notch is on the shank. There's basically, if you were to think about it as divided up into thirds, I was positioning the rattle 1/3 of the way into that section. So if this whole edge or whole last bit of the rattle, or sorry, the shank is a section, I positioned the rattle 1/3 of the way in to that section. And what that does is it'll leave you a little bit more room up front for your wraps. And that's why we put it upside down, because the rattle's on the bottom. And then I proceeded to do 3 more wraps of the same brush as I did at the very end of the hook. And then I moved into this this slightly darker, slightly more brown brush, and I did 3 wraps of that. And that brush has, you can kind of see that UV brown orange, like lightning quality to it. And so we're getting into our UV language here. Still got some more real estate on the rattle, so we're going to start our transition. And again, this section's going to be heavily trimmed, but getting towards the end of the fly, a lot of those fibers are going to be longer, and so you can have more of an impact with less wraps, because those fibers are going to extend out and cover more of the fly. So I think this transition's gonna work out well. So our next color is going to be almost like a peanut butter, and this is a even more UV reflective material in there, same kind of orangish, and this is a little thicker material. This is our flash and holographic flash and fiber. So that brush material is a little thicker, which is a nice place in this belly section to have that thickness. We're probably gonna finish. Yeah, we're gonna finish this this rattle and put our magic head on, and then continue with 3 other different colors for our head. So should be interesting. Can't wait to see what this looks like once we trim it. So far, I'm pretty stoked. This is gonna look great. This section's a little hard when you're getting towards the end of the rattle and you kind of step off the rattle. It wants to slip. I haven't really come up with an easy method for it. What you kind of want is you want to get wraps over the rattle, right? And it's slipped twice for me already. And then as you step on to the shank, you don't want it to slip. Because obviously when you're wrapping over the rattle, it's way more surface area than a shank wrap. So it's kind of nice to use that rattle to get that material in there. All right, so I think one more wrap here in front of the rattle, and then we'll finish that. And it's looking pretty good to me. I can kind of see that transition. Love all the flash. There's tons of added wavelength flash and ripple, ice, flash, golds. And when I wrap back on this brush, I'm wrapping to the rattle. So far, so good. That looks cool. Very happy with what we got so far. Super excited to see what this looks like when we start trimming too. All right, so now we got the next phase. We'll whip finish here. Add some glue to our shank. We'll throw on that R14 magic head. Here it is. This is the secret sauce. This is the thing that makes this design work. Now, if you don't have these, body tubing, you can make this shape, and you can add a body tubing section in here and maybe seal it with some resin or some glue or something. But these are still available online. You just have, sometimes you have to do a deep dive. There's some on eBay. I just think they're perfect. They're light. They're amazingly durable. Incredible. And somebody needs to start making these. They need to stay in our fly fishing world, fly tying world. Now, here's one thing that I was kind of thinking about as I was doing these transitions, and we can do this, and I was just about to forget about it, but luckily I remembered. So we can add a veil, a top veil, over this section with some dubbing, and I think it's worth it to just do it. So I'm going to put that thread back on there. Actually, no. This is what I'm going to do. I am going to do something different. We're going to do our veil over the magic head after we possibly add flash. And so I'm either going to add the flash or I'm not going to do it and do a veil, because the Titan dubbing has lots of really cool flash in it. So I'm not sure which direction we're going to go with that, but I like the idea better than doing a veil right here, which doesn't really, there's not much purpose behind it. That's what I love about fly tying. It's just, as you go, you know, you just kind of got to keep your mind open. So I cut the nipple off at the halfway point of the magic head. And as I push it back, I want the shank to be centered. If you push it back too far, it's gonna, the top end's gonna dip because of the mass of the rattle. It's gonna cause that to happen. So you don't want to go back too far. You want to find that sweet spot where it's pushing up against the fibers, yet it feels centered. And what's important about that is that if you misjudge that, you're really going to limit your real estate on the shank. So you want to kind of push it as far back as you can. And sometimes it's okay to have it aimed down a little bit. So what I'm noticing here is that with this design, I want to optimize real estate because I want to make more color transitions moving forward. And so if I were to look at it, I'd say that it's pretty straight, but it's a little bit angled down, just a tiny bit, and I think that's totally fine. It's definitely touching the rattle down here. but it's not too warped or doesn't look off. And it's pushing back these fibers, which is what you want those to be pushed back. So I think I'm good with where it is right now. Before we figure out our veil or what we're gonna do, we're gonna use these copper reflective wavetails as our lateral lines. And we're gonna trim these down. These are XXL, and we're gonna trim them. So what I like to do is align them so that it looks like one. And you're just aligning the saw tooth section. And then about 1, 2, 3 down, you're gonna take that, you're gonna put the scissors in that section, you're gonna cut up like that. You're gonna flip it over and cut down, same following that sawtooth, so that you have a little bit of a point there. And so you cut off a section about this big. And then the bottom, same deal. These are a little bit too long. So align it up. And right about halfway, a little bit, actually less than halfway, cut off right about there. And then you're gonna take your scissors and you're just gonna either round it off if you really wanna get ambitious, but I've been okay with just basically making a point. A little easier to do. It doesn't have to be perfect, but something like that. And I found that's about good for your lateral lines for this scale of fly. Seating these, it's important that you really focus on getting them straight. They'll want to slip on you, they'll want to aim down. So use the eye of the shank to kind of align the fly. And as you're holding them down, I'm just very cautious about how they want to warp while I'm wrapping over them. They always want to point down like that. That's kind of where they want to go. So you want them to be straight or a little bit up as you're holding them down. And you can kind of actually turn the magic head too and just adjust it if it gets off. All right, so it's a little bit up, which is great. That's what I want. The other side. And putting the glue on the plastic of the magic head and then onto the shank. Perfect. There we go. Lateral reflective lateral line. It's like a mirror copper. That'll look nice. Alrighty. So I have this flash here. One thing I'm not happy about with this flash is that It's a little dark. I think I'll keep it short. I think I'll add some. I'm pretty sure this will be all right. So I cut off a pretty significant amount. I'm gonna just pull on it and taper it a little bit. It's pretty kinky. It's got some different quality to it. It's got some kind of more circular, like weird ribbony stuff in there, which just adds density or texture. I bet it's what I suspect that once I start brushing this, it'll get more kind of weird, which I'm not too worried about. But we'll see. So I'm just kind of spinning it, getting those fibers all around, trying to get a nice distribution. And then I'm going to go underneath with a little bit of a shorter section. The shorter fibers are on the bottom, the longer ones are mostly on top. Wrap all the way back to the magic head. All right, so again, a lot of these fibers will be trimmed as we're trimming the brushes. We're not gonna go out of our way to not cut into those. And then on the top, I'm going to do a little bit of a veil over that flash with this Nightmare Musky Flies. And this is pumpkin seed. Really cool color. And I'm not really ripping. I'm just more like pulling on it and stacking. I want to just get a nice taper, nice even sort of blend of everything. Just like about that. And depending on how that looks, I might do a bottom section too. We'll see. So it's about 60-40. Mash it down. Looks pretty good. Dig it. I think I'm just going to leave the top. So I'm seeing this is getting pretty thick right here, which I don't want to overdo. All right, so where were we here? We got this brush. Now we're going to go a little darker here. Okay, we're going into rusty territory. little shorter brush, which is okay. It's this is actually this is the holographic flash and fiber, and it's a little shorter. But when you have shorter, thicker material, what you're building is a little bit more of a stability. So you're building a little bit more of a denser head. We're only going to do 2 wraps of this. I think that was 2. And then we have 2 more to go after this. Both of those are longer. Wrap back as far as we can go. Brush it out. I'm getting excited. This looks cool. This looks really cool. All right, these are our final 2 here. Doesn't look like much of a difference, but you can kind of see how that one here is lighter than this one, so we're gonna go for it. Both of these guys are regular flash and fiber, so they're a little thinner, a little bit easier to deal with. The wire is the .006 wire, so again, just you can get away with a few more wraps closer to the eye and not worrying about that dense wire sort of crowding everything and making it difficult. And I've got some exposed, I've got a little bit of an exposed section right before the eye here, where there's barely any thread wraps, barely any material. So I'm going to pay attention to that and not crowd that and leave plenty of room for the dubbing head. I think we can get away with 3 wraps of this stuff here. I think 2. Definitely looking darker. Yep, that's good. Now it's getting a little sketchy, which is all right. Okay, now we run into the problem of the shank being pretty flimsy. So I wrap back on that guy. This is where your thin, strong thread really comes into play. I can't stress that enough. Having a thin, strong thread. You can see how this brush is just looking like the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. So what you do in that case is cut out the problem areas. It's hard to see on camera, but a lot of problem area right here. I'm going to cut that out of the picture, and we'll use it in a different section somewhere down the line, or not. The rest of this brush looks pretty good. Pull out some of these fibers up top. Get our wire exposed. That in. Get ready for the final section. Now I think with this, what I want to do is wrap, snap the thread. I want to wrap to the eye and wrap back, and I'm already a little concerned. I'm seeing more bulk than I suspected. So we'll see. I think once we get to the dubbing, we're gonna have a little bit of a challenge, but you know, that's it. That's how it goes, you know. Gotta take your risks. Deal with your challenges. Still confident that our end result's going to be worth it. Alrighty, so we're almost there. I'm going to try to get away with one more wrap. We're actually right behind the eye, but let's see if we can do it. Key is going to be to pull back on it. Really, and then wrap back on it. That looks pretty good. Go. Okay. Now comes the fun part. Now when you're doing the last section, you don't want your shank to be down like that. If it's angled down, poses a problem. You want it to be straight, which it is right now, or the very, well, yeah, straight is the best, because it helps with eliminating any sort of slippage when you're doing that dubbing head. Now here's the hard part, because I haven't really worked out exactly what color I want that head to be. I know that I don't want the head to be lighter than the darkest color. At least that's my thought. And so I've got this Titan dubbing. It's UV Sucker Brown. It seems to be a good match. A little darker. But I might want to blend it with something like this. We got Magnum Creamer's Floor, and then we got Fozzie. It's really hard to say. And I'm thinking, initially, Creamer's Floor was looking like it was going to be a good blend. So let's see. Let's just see what that looks like. Because I got a lot of, well, we can do it on the base of the vise here. Alrighty, here we go. Might have too much Creamer's Floor in that, we'll see. Might have to add some more of that sucker. And I know this Creamer's Floor looks pretty light, but I also know that when it gets wet, it does take on a darker shade. So I'm gonna set that there and just take a gander. Looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna add a little bit more of that Nightmare Musky Flies sucker. And when I'm pulling at it, I don't want to grab too much flash. I want to make sure that I'm grabbing the actual brown color fibers. Sometimes when you're pulling at the dubbing, you tend to pull out more flash than anything. So already this is too much for one section, but I don't know if it's enough for both sections, top and bottom, so we'll see. When you're doing a blend, or you're just using the Nightmare Musky Flies Titan dubbing for your head section, keep in mind that once you put the resin on that stuff, the Nightmare Musky Flies Titan dubbing is pretty thin. It just lies down. It's like really thin. It's nice to have a little more mass. So if you're just using the Titan dubbing, consider that. The magnum dubbing is much more kinky, much more mass to it, and really creates a nice head. This is a little bit of a struggle here, I'm not gonna lie, but I think the end result's gonna be worth it. So what I did was I have the section, and I want a little bit more on top than I use on the bottom. So I've got a little thinner. This is the bottom section. This is the top, a little thicker. Not by much. We'll do the top first. 60-40. One loose wrap. Mash it down a little bit, spread it out. As I pull this back, I'm exposing the eye, and I'm just wrapping right behind the eye. And I'm okay with it folding over like that. That bulge there, see it's folding forward, that's okay. I know it's locked in to the degree that I need it to be. Grab my second section, we're gonna flip it over. This is where it starts to get sketchy, so you're keeping tension on the thread at all times. Laying it in. I'm using all of my fingers to kind of stabilize everything. One loose wrap over. As I pinch it down, I'm going to fold it back, expose that eye. I'm going to wrap, now it's starting to slip. I'm going to wrap around the eye, reset everything, pull back pretty hard, wrap again, and then keep tension as I'm spinning this vise back to its upright position. This is where it helps to have a good bobbin. You can kind of get in there, those tight little spaces. So far, everything's working out. Maybe get one more wrap. And now we have the awesomely difficult task of our final single whip finish. So I'm pulling back this way, keeping tension with the bobbin. As I use this tool, this is where it gets pretty awkward. And sometimes this tool seems like it's a good thing for this stage, but it's just because I don't know any better. So I got that wrap in there, keeping that tension as I'm pulling it back. It's hard to see on your angle. And then as I'm pulling this way, and I'm stabilizing the head with my hand as I'm pulling on it. We got that whip finish in there. Super sketchy. We used all the real estate. And so we've got our head in there, top and bottom. Now you see some videos of guys creating dubbing heads, and they're putting a ton of dubbing in there. They have lots of real estate. What I like is an exposed side. So when I put those eyes on there, all that flash from the brush is laying down, and just, it's like you have this like real flashy lateral part of the fly. I like that for my heads, and also I like the density to be on the top and the bottom, because I like my heads, or the fly, to have a high and tight profile. So that's why I do what I do for this fly. I'm not creating a flat surface where the fly stops and turns and walks the dog. I want this one to be all over the place and swim fast and dart. And I want that magic head to be the driver. It's a little different concept. But here we go. We got our sucker fly. Again, once we start trimming this, we're gonna really see that all those colors sort of come out. But I'm pretty happy with it. Nice pale back end, darker head. Before I ruin this, I'm gonna get in there and glue that whip finish down and make sure that it's permanent. As I'm gluing, I'm not really too careful about the eye of the shank, because what I want to do is, most importantly, get that glue all in there, that Zap-A-Gap, and then take the bodkin, get it in the eye, and then kind of wiggle it around and push those fibers back away from it. And it's plenty good. We're in there nice and secure. Sketchy, but went a lot better than I thought it was gonna go. All right, so we're gonna brush out this dubbing here. And I don't want to brush it too aggressively, because once we put the resin on there, I want to use that material as sort of a denser head. Especially with the Titan dubbing being mixed in there, it'll thin out real quick if you brush it too much. So that looks pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. I dig this. All right, another thing that's a little different than some of the previous videos. I'm gonna hold off on the resin. I'm gonna put the eyes on, and then we're gonna trim first before I use the resin. That's just something that I liked a little bit better, and it allows you to take this this dubbing and just move it out of the way as you're trimming, because I like that dubbing to kind of just lay down and not have a flat top to it. Want to keep that taper. So we'll get our eyes on next. I like to lay the fly down, take the comb, and brush out the fibers that are going to be under the eyeballs, so they're nice and straight. Make sure everything looks good before I lock them in with the eye. Just one last look at the eyeball. There's a couple different options. We got these crazy ones, which might be an interesting touch. Holy crap. Check that out. That's tough. We'll come back to that. I like that, but let me just check out these other ones. These almost get hidden. Definitely not as much of a statement, but how much of a statement do you want to make? That's the question. It's a tough call, but since it's for a buddy, and the fly he showed me kind of looked more realistic, we're gonna go with the realistic. Minor details. In this point, we're really designing for the fisherman more so than anything that's consequential for the fish. Make sure I know which side's up and down. Okay, we're good. So flies on the base there, nice and flat. I'm going to use this ultra gel. Right about there is good. A little bit down from the eye. If you're able to get a nice thread dam that's visible, sometimes I put it right below the thread dam. And this one, in this case, I'm a little bit further back. Just a tiny bit. what you can see there is all that flash behind the eye. I like that. That's what I want. I want that to be visible. I don't want to mask that with more dubbing on the side. I want it to be kind of a high and tight, skinny. I want this eye to push all those fibers down. And I want this dubbing head to be kind of a top and bottom thing. So very happy with what we got here. And what's cool is this dubbing here, sucker, UV sucker brown, has red flash in it, which kind of is a nice touch for those red eyes. So all in all, I think that was a good decision. While we're waiting for that to dry, I'll show you guys my next fly. I'm going to do have these matte gray. They're kind of a little bit flashy, but they're more matte gray tails. I'm going to do a majority body of this this gray, lots of oil slick in it. Really cool stuff. Then I'm going to do this is wampa hair with electric ripple ice and some flash. That's going to be the gill. So I'm going to do a gill wrap after the magic head, and just a few wraps of this stuff. And then we're going to finish it in cotton candy and then a purple head. So same kind of concept where the majority is going to be the gray, and then we're going to do one hot spot, and then the dubbing, I'm going to try to find a blend that works. So I've got all these purples: cotton candy, fluorescent pink, purple, and UV purple. Every one of them is a different shade, but I want to find the right blend for the head of that fly. And then we're going to do this. This is actually a rainbow, but it turned out to be like a different color purple than you could get. So if you get the rainbow saddle tails, they're all different. But I found two that were pretty much the same, and it's not the fuchsia purple that you get from that color. It's a little bit more purple. So those will be our lateral lines. So I'm pretty happy, pretty stoked going forward with that next fly. And then, oh yeah, so I want to use these eyes for that too, which are peach, but I think will look really cool. So going back to the unnatural. Another thought I've been having is that I was talking about the Atlantic salmon that are kind of moving into Lake St. Clair, and I imagine that these muskie by now have figured out that that is a potential food source. So just another colorway, another pattern to mimic. And I don't think this gray or purple is going to equate to an Atlantic salmon, but it just got me thinking about what an Atlantic salmon musky fly would look like. All right, so before I glue the other eye on, I want to make sure I do the same thing and brush out those fibers. These are 14 millimeter Misfit voodoo eyes, available at Lund's Fly Shop. Super cool. Just make sure they look even enough. There's something about a red eye, just looks badass. Looks angry. That's why I love smallmouth. It's one of the many reasons why smallmouth are amazing. It's just so, you can just see that flash, man. It's so great. So much going on here. And so as I trim this, those sections that I painstakingly wrap through will show themselves a little bit better. Very cool looking. The mass of these eyes and the ultra gel glue just takes a while to settle, and I've found that if you rush it, push it too much, that'll just fall off, which is fine. You just glue it back on, but so I'm just taking my time with it here. I think we're about ready to start trimming, so what I'll do is just pull up these fibers here. I'll actually pull up a little bit of that brown too. Just like that. And we'll use our comb. Brush everything down. Do the same on the other side. Just like that. Start the painstaking process trimming this fly. Oh, that's fun. Here we go. All right, here we go. Just a little bit off at a time. And the whole time you're trimming, you want to be aware of your hands over these lateral line saddle tails. It's really easy to lose track of them and get into the zone and potentially cut one, which would suck. At the end of the day, this fly does not really need to have those lateral line saddle tails. So if you do badly cut one, you can either make the same cut on the other side, leave it as just a damaged bait fish, or rip them out and still catch fish. Luckily, and I'm jinxing myself right now, I have never cut one. But I'm sure it will happen. So you're starting to see the taper. It's looking good. Remember the rattle creates a denser belly section right in front of the hook. So right here, you have a bump, and so you want to work at that. That's going to be your most challenging section to trim. It's also important to keep pulling at these fibers. And I find myself trimming even the next day. Seen some videos of guys using clippers too, which I think is kind of cool, but I'm not quite ready for that. So I just grazed the hook there. Kind of rounding off the, so as I'm tying, I'm kind of doing a pass at an angle, doing a vertical pass, and I'm angling the fly and kind of rounding it off on the bottom on both sides. Doing the same for the tail section. I usually like to keep the top slightly longer than the bottom. If you think about riding the fly, the more material, the more air trapped, the more it's going to want to swim right. I don't know how accurate that is, but it makes sense to me. Nothing too noticeable, but it's just something that I have been thinking about. So another thing I'll do is I'll hold the fly like that, and so what you'll have is almost like a, you think about it, the way these brushes are, if you trim the top and bottom, you're left with a kind of an oval, almost like the taper of my fingers, in each section. Each section is like going to be, or like a half circle. And so if you pull on the fibers, you can kind of see that just from pulling the fibers out, trimming the top, you're going to be left with a rounded section. So you can kind of look at each stage, so you can kind of see how there's uneven hairs there, and come around and just trim that, almost like a big tarpon scale. That's been kind of fun to mess with. And again, this is just the nature of this fly. And obviously, when you get to the tail section, it's all homogeneous, so you're not really affecting the color. But when you're trimming the upper section, you're actually affecting how much color bleeds down into the fly. So it's kind of interesting. These dubbing fibers kind of confusing me, but you don't want to cut these. You want these to be kind of long and just mingling with the saddle tail. More taper on that tail there. It's looking good. Head's looking pretty big, which is okay. I got to work on this belly section here because the hook's still, it's right there. It's not that exposed, so we want to definitely take that down quite a bit. And as we do, you got to kind of adjust the rest of the fly. So here we go. This part gets a little sketchy, a little bit more difficult to judge. You want to find that sweet spot where you're not cutting too much. So ultimately, that fish is going to find that hook. So let's talk about a single hook musky fly versus why you'd want a treble hook on a Medusa. And I think the answer is just simple physics. If you think about a head shake of a muskie and the mass of a rubber bait, each head shake's going to have an opposite force to it. Whereas the mass of a fly is almost non-existent. So the hook is relatively stable. As it shakes, the fly isn't jerking that hook back and forth. That hook's relatively stable. And so the contact is much more of a stable contact. Whereas a heavier weight, a heavier opposing force, if the muskie jerks right, that bait's going to pull that hook and pull that hook other, different directions, and you'll see oftentimes that's how they'll shake the hook. And so having multiple points of contact in a treble hook makes perfect sense. The more points of contact, as he pulls one section out, the other section maintains a different degree of force or a different direction of force. It's almost like the more it shakes, the more hooks get buried. And that makes sense when you're fishing something with a lot of mass to it, as opposed to a fly, which doesn't have any and is relatively stable. So it's one of many reasons why I'm okay with and confident with a single hook. I've caught muskie on this design, and I like that the hook's middle. It's in the middle, so if the muskie T-bones it, it's right there. A short bite with a fly this size is pretty irrelevant, but even then the hook's pretty far back. It's not just right one up front here like this. So it's in a really good position to make contact, and I'm more confident about this hook placement than I think any other design I could possibly imagine with this particular build and fly. Having that long shank up front really helps with the glide bait jerk motion. There's no need for a stinger in a musky fly. I truly believe that, unless you're thinking like maybe you want to get a bass as a bycatch, in which I've caught smallmouth musky fishing, and I've caught some big smallmouth. That smallmouth would really have to commit to get that hook. Whereas if you had a back hook, your chances of actually hooking up with that smallmouth are pretty good. So that would be one reason to have a hook back there. But I tend to not really be thinking about smallmouth while I'm musky fishing. So I'm okay with giving up that potential. Getting closer. I think at this point we can stop and we can start applying some resin and sculpting that head. And so here at this point our goal is to get that resin in there, get the nice head shape, and then do our trimming afterwards and do the final stage. But you can see now that head, the transition of color is definitely more visible, and you got the majority of the body, that nice pale, into the kind of yellow shiny. The strongest flash is going to be in this section here, which is going to really catch the light. And I'll obviously do my outside video of some natural light. You'll get a real good look at all that flash in there. It's beautiful. This opaque head, when it's wet, it's going to take on a nice dark brown to it. So pretty happy with that. Actually, when I put the resin on there, you're going to see that. So very cool fly. Very cool. I'm happy with the way it came out. Let's put some resin on there and see how that works. Flex. Another thing I've been doing is after the flex, I'll put some hard resin. So we'll show you that too. All right, so pretty decent amount, not too much. We're gonna really work it in right above and below the eye of the shank. Oops, a little got away from us, it's okay. So what I'll do is I'll switch fingers if I feel like there's too much. I have the majority of resin on this finger, and that way I can kind of limit or quickly diminish the amount of resin that I'm mashing with, and then when I want to add more, I got this finger loaded, so I'll put more right at the nose of the fly, then switch back to the other finger. Work our way around the eye a little bit, just a little bit. But I don't want this resin to go anywhere near the middle or end of these fibers here. Actually, we should rephrase that. The middle's fine. We can move it to the middle of the fibers, but don't want to move it all the way to the end. I want it to sort of concentrate around the eyes. And you can move it out a little bit, but not too far. That's the key. Just don't go too far. So that's about good. You can see how that it darkened it up pretty good. Wipe your hands off. All right, so now we're gonna find that taper that we like. So start to move it down. On something nice and rounded. I'm kind of just stroking it that way. Sometimes you can kind of put your finger on it and like fold it up, create that little bit more of a mass to the head there. So instead of like a triangle, you can kind of make it more rounded by doing that. Wherever you flash it with the light, that's where it's going to lock in. It's looking pretty good right now. Then I'll kind of give it a good eyeball, I'll find the hook, make sure that I'm not, that the bottom section is not too I guess bulging too much. And before I zap it, I like to kind of clean the eyes off a little bit. Go back, fix it a little bit. Looks pretty good. You absolutely want to look at it head on. I'm happy. All right, we'll zap it. And you can kind of see how those eyes don't look like they're that UV, but they actually have a really good UV reflectivity to it. It's a little subdued, but they hit that UV light, which is pretty cool. They got both a little bit of UV quality and a little bit of flash quality to it, but not too much. So there we have it. We got our flex resin in there, and we're going to follow that up with some of the thin hard stuff. My goal for that is to create a little bit of a denser, harder front end. So I'm taking my bodkin, making sure that that eye is good. It is a crowded eye after all. And so when we do this step, we are gonna absolutely hit the very front end of this fly. So you don't wanna put a thick amount of this stuff on. You wanna do a very thin layer. So I'll show you, and I spread it around. Just the nose, right below the eye of the shank, and then I come over to the eye of the fly. I hit that edge, and I bring it down to a little bit past where the, if you were to draw a line straight down where the eye is, take it a little bit past that. And it's a little bit too much, so I can just kind of move it over to the other side. You just want a thin layer. And you want that to be just a slightly stiffer section. And what that'll do is it'll sort of reinforce that nose and blend in with the flex resin to go from a stiffer nose to a more flexible rest of the head. It just stabilizes everything. And so again, you can use different parts of the bodkin. So I know I have more resin on the tip, so I'm going to move over to the shaft of the bodkin just to get less on there as I'm moving up. That's about good. Make sure your taper you're happy with that taper. Still looks good. We'll hit it with the light. And you can just feel that you've got just this hard section right here. It's gonna cut through the water a little bit more, and then that hard section leads to the flex and just creates a little bit more of a stable head. So there you have it. Take my comb, just make sure, brush that out a little bit. I think I added a little too much that flex resin to the dubbing, but that seems about good. All right, so there we go. We got our sucker copper to pale. A little more trimming to do. I'll finish it up, put the video on, and film it outside for you guys. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks a lot.